All right, well, welcome. We are about to start our third and final module of the semester. This is sort of an extension from what we've already been doing, of course, which is narrative. We're going to be talking specifically about genres, and actually, then we move into something that's like sort of related because we're going to be talking about tropes a lot, and then we're going to talk about film representation. So it's a little bit different, but look at this as a more sort of like a very specific module or unit on different types of narratives. You probably know what a genre is already, but of course, we're going to review it. Um, I have my research assistant here, Blue. She can help guide us through it. Um, so basically, a genre is just some sort of category of story. And of course, there are genres in every medium of story, whether it's novels or film or what have you. But really, what defines the genre is they usually if different films from the same genre are categorized as being in the same genre, chances are they share the same subject, the same themes, or maybe even how it's presented. So maybe there are certain conventions, like filmic techniques, for instance, that you see over and over again in certain genres. Maybe even music, right? Like you can recognize from the music what kind of um, story it's going to be, what genre it fits into. And then, of course, we have these overarching categories of genre, which, as we'll talk about, kind of bleed into one another. But then underneath those, you also have these subgenres, which also sort of have their own bleeding into other genres. So, for instance, like action adventure could have lots of different subgenres. One of them could be crime. A subgenre of crime could be the cop buddy movie, where it's like two dudes like working the police beat together, like that type of stuff. And so, genres sort of break down into their own sort of like subcategories, which then, sort of merge with other genres. Um, so what is it that you're looking for if you're trying to analyze a genre and try to figure out where it goes, or figure out, for instance, um, how filmmakers make it conform, or we're going to talk about a little bit later, subvert different genres, like maybe you're making a parody and you actually kind of want to make fun of these conventions. So what is it we're looking at to actually define these different categories? Well, one of them could be the storyline itself, right? So there are certain plot lines that you see over and over again in certain genres. The example I have here, if you're watching a mob movie, normally the whole idea of the mob movie is watching some sort of rise to power and then, fall from grace or something. So that's sort of like a typical plot line that you would see in a mob movie. Or let's see, what's another good one? Well, think about romantic comedies. Romantic comedies have a lot of the same conventions too. And there's even sort of subgenres in that. But let's think about how, maybe there's people that are in unhappy relationships and then they meet each other and then they realize that they don't want to be in their unhappy relationship anymore. They want to be with each other. Or, that kind. So you'll see the same type of thing recycled over and over again. Same thing with film conventions. I don't know if you remember this from one of our earlier lectures, but we talked about how, for instance, certain types of lighting might be associated with different types of genres. Like if the opening scene is going to use like really low key, high contrast, creepy lighting, right? That just accentuates like somebody's face and everything else is dark or something. There's a good chance you feel like you're watching a horror film. Of course, you're probably getting other cues like the music, things like that. We talked about how fantasy uses a lot of high key lighting, like those types of things. Same as musicals. So there are all these conventions. Angles, Westerns, for instance, use like very wide angles because they're trying to show the landscape, within the genre itself. So we can look at just sort of different film techniques that are being used. And then, returning to the stuff that we talked about in the last module, a lot of the same themes will be recycled too in different genres. And as we know, themes are communicated with various things like symbols and motifs and allegories and things like that. So all of those things get recycled too. An example of this might be like thinking about how right? When you see cowboy hats, you assume Western. When you see spaceships, right, over and over, like you assume it's not always that way, but it's a good shortcut to sort of say, like, oh, that's probably sci-fi. But even the themes themselves, science fiction is often dealing with um, themes related to humans' relationships with technology or artificial intelligence and, like, science related things within fiction, hence science fiction. Um, so we think about like a mob genre. So, okay, so a lot of these things, I have some examples up here. One tell might be, for instance, like the character, right? Like if there's like a mob boss, it's like, oh, we're probably watching a crime genre. Now, you'll notice there's a lot of stereotypes that get associated with this too, and that's kind of part of how genres work, right? They play on the stereotypes we have in our head. So I'm not trying to be derogatory here, but often, right? Like shows about Italian families, right, will sort of cue like, oh, is this mob? Is this mafia? Is this whatever? But, I like that example because if you go by like just the typical definition of the mob genre, which it's like, okay, well, we know the plot needs to have something to do with organized crime, and maybe the organized criminals are the people that we're interested in. Well, what about Narcos, right? So Narcos is not a show, which by the way, Narcos is excellent. Narcos is not was not a show about U.S. Italian family mafia type of thing, right? Like The Godfather. Narcos is about, Colombian gangsters. It's about and it's not about the types of things that U.S. mafia is running either. It's about cocaine, right? So um, it doesn't mean that everything has to fit exactly, but typically there's like a broad definition, but then there's some flexibility in that in terms of what fits and what we could count as a mob genre, or maybe you want to say organized crime. I don't know. Um, One thing I want you to appreciate, since it's a film appreciation class, is that genres sometimes come and go, and just like fashion trends, sometimes they come back. So the popularity of certain genres kind of like moves in waves throughout history, and as I think talk about in the next slide, there's various factors that affect that. One of them being technology, but just some examples here. Early 2000s, we had a boom of like fantasy adventure dramas. Slashers were really big in the 1980s. Disaster films had been pretty big, and then they had in the 70s, and then they had a revival in the 1990s. Like, well, actually, I don't know if you know, but around the same time, we had like Independence Day and Armageddon come out, and it was all of these they were action movies, but it was like the disaster film is like a subgenre of action movie. And some of the tropes that got recycled there was like, the hero sacrificing, usually himself, in the wake of some sort of disaster. And, anyway, so um, here's an interesting infographic I always like to share because it just lets you sort of compare some genres in terms of how they've changed in popularity over the past 100 years. And you can see here, musicals aren't exactly what they used to be. They were very, very popular around like mid-century, but although of course we still have musicals and we like them, they don't really compare to other things like thrillers and horror, science fiction, um, comedy. I don't know how to explain the comedy, but I actually do. I know how to explain some of these other genres. Um, Documentary, actually, I would argue is, documentary is more is something that can be easily user generated, and so we have technology for that. And these other non-fictional genres that use a lot of special effects have become more popular because we've gotten better at using special effects. And so this is the next point I really want to drive home is like technology has a lot to do with why some genres gain in popularity. And by technology, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, we have CGI now, although that's part of it. Um, it could also just be like, trends in how we make movies. So it used to be that, early back in the studio days, like literally, sorry, I'm kind of giving it away. Back in like classic Hollywood, most things were made in the studio. And then we started taking cameras outside, right? Probably because the technology of the camera changed, and it's like, whoa, whoa, we can make movies outdoors now. Hey, you know it would be good? Let's get some horses and make some westerns, you know? And so the popularity of the western really got was heavily influenced by our ability to actually go and to the West. Actually, I don't know if it was in the West, but but to get out of the studio and Westerns are so defined by geography that it makes sense that it's like you can really only tell those stories when you can bring the geography into the movie. Musicals, another example, became popular with synchronized sound, right? It's like having a silent movie having a silent musical doesn't really make sense. But as soon as we got like sound integrated into the movies, and not just like, piano music, but like actually we can hear people's dialogue, we can hear people sing, musicals became a lot more popular. And think about how like the advent of color technology would affect these things too. All of a sudden, we want Wizard of Oz, right? We want like a fantasy scape where we can see not just color, but really vibrant, like fantastical color. And then we're going to be talking a lot about this in the next, well, this genre actually, in the next little mini lecture. Superhero movies became popular because now that we have better technology to do special effects, the type of special effects that comic books can do very easily because, they're just I don't want to minimize it, but they're just cartoon drawings, right? It's really easy to do special effects in comic books, but now we can do those types of things in moving images. So the genre in the past 20 years has become a lot more popular. Okay, so why are genres important? Why do we need them? What are their functions? There's four of them. So one is it sets audience expectations. A lot of you probably, when you started this class, were like, "Oh crap, I don't like horror, and this lady's going to make me watch The Shining." And you're like, "Crap." And maybe you still hate horror, and maybe you still hate The Shining, and that's all fine. Hopefully you appreciate it. But the whole point is like you're able to sort of make that assessment because you have a certain understanding of what genres you like and you don't like, and what you're going to get from different types of genres. So that's important, right? That's just, how we choose what we want to watch. And it's also how creators to this next one, people who are making the movies, writing the screenplays, whatever, decide what kind of story they're going to tell, right? What kind of feel they want it to have, what kind of genre they want it to fit in. So it's sort of like matching audience with filmmaker in that way. The other two is kind of my favorite as a social scientist or somebody who likes to study media's role in society. So, one of the social functions of genres is ritual. So, the fact that we all sort of have these collective expectations for genres, it means we all sort of know what to expect. It also means that it can satisfy some sort of some of our cultural needs for shared experience. And we know, for instance, that, a lot of times when we watch superhero movies or we're gonna get there's a lot of patriotism like behind it, right? So that it sort of like feeds into this like collective experience. It's also, something that we're able to share even on like more interpersonal levels. You know that like when you go on a date and you see a romantic comedy with somebody else, right? It's going to give you like warm and fuzzies. And so there's like sort of like a way of satisfying some social connection there. Social reflection is related, but slightly different. That function of genres refers to how it actually they serve a mirroring function in our society. They actually are like reflecting different things about what's going on with us as a culture. So there's sort of, you could think about this almost as like a historical function, but sometimes the history doesn't become clear until you're out of it, right? So an example I have here is zombie movies. So like we've had zombie movies for a long time, obviously, decades now, but throughout all of these different iterations of zombies, and not just movies but TV too, they're representing different types of things to us as a society. Night of the Living Dead, zombies were sort of a metaphor for racism. It was all about like there was like sort of like this civil rights undertone to it, and that's when the movie was made. Dawn of the Dead, all these Romero films, he's trying to make comments on like consumerism and things like that. And as we keep going through different stages in our history, the zombies, although they're always representing, you could say this, the faceless horde, the unintelligent masses, all of these people who are being duped into whatever, what's duping them can change. And so um, zombies are really reflecting the different fears that we have as a society at that time, back in like the 1950s with B movies, the type of alien movies we had. The aliens were scary, right? We were scared back then of things like
Mhm.
communists and strangers coming into our country. So there are alien movies reflected those things. But then, in the 1980s, we had like, I don't know, E.T., and we had all these like friendly aliens, and
Mhm.
the genre, the alien genre, if there is, there's a
Mhm.
bunch of subgenres, it sort of changed with what was going on in history. So that's why they sort of are a tool, if you can look at it that way, to or reflect what's going on, or maybe it's better to think of them as artifacts, of like reflecting what had happened at a certain time, our collective unconscious and things like that. So, okay, I think. Yeah, we'll stop here, and then I'll break this up and I'll start the next one where we're going to talk about subverting these genres. So, see you for that video. All right. Bye.